What's up? My name is Eric Butler. This channel is called Report and Opine. I am back, and from the New York Post, brew who? State moves to strip Madison Square Garden of liquor license. And maybe this isn't a terrible idea, but who could imagine going to Madison Square Garden for any event and not paying $28 for a single beer? They say it could be last call for alcohol at the Garden. The state liquor authority has initiated proceedings that could strip Madison Square Garden, Radio City Music Hall, and the Beacon Theater of their liquor license, the Post has learned. The agency slapped the James Dolan-owned properties with administrative charges over his banning attorneys from the venues who are in active litigation against him or the Garden. So they have a bone to pick with James Dolan, and I think probably anybody who lives in New York, well, especially Knicks fans, have a bone to pick with James Dolan. He's like from the producers, you can make more money off of a flop than a hit, and that's why the Knicks have been so bad for decades, because he's somehow cashing in on their failures. And I don't know exactly how it's done, because if I did, I'd do it myself. If successful, the SLA could prevent fans from enjoying a brew at Rangers and Knicks games, concert, cocktails, or nog at the Radio City Christmas Spectacular. The 4 violations, which have not been previously reported, were received via certified mail on February 21. The SLA demanded a formal plea from Dolan's properties by March 15, so the clock is ticking on that. And a bunch of giant pictures, some woman drinking a beer, Dolan himself with the mean face and his arms crossed. All right, very informative. Instead, Dolan, 67, went scorched earth, filing a petition Saturday in Manhattan Supreme Court asking a judge to stop the SLA violations, calling the enforcement an abuse of power. And that's what you get in New York. It's like that is par for the course in New York. Every single thing they do is an abuse of power. Remember, there was a couple years there where they told you couldn't even leave the house without a mask, basically. You couldn't go to a store without a mask, and then they did a complete 180 and said you can't go into a store if you do have a mask on, because when they say jump, you're supposed to say how high. You couldn't go into Applebee's without proof of paperwork. And I know I'm constantly harping on that, but think about that. And this guy's talking about abuse of power. Well, yeah, that comes with the territory in New York. You are going to obey, right? They're not going to help the broke down NYCHA tenants who can't pay rent for whatever reasons, probably because they were told by the government they couldn't go to work, and instead they're going to give the money that they should be giving to people who probably came here legally, even though they chose not to learn English. Different story, and I digress. They're giving that money to people who just hopped over the fence, and they're not calling them immigrants or illegals at all, but asylum seekers, because that's what they do, is manipulate the language at every single turn. So yes, an abuse of power comes with the territory in New York. 67-year-old James Nolan or Dolan or whatever his name is should obviously know that by now, and he's learning it the hard way, apparently. This gangster-like governmental organization has finally run up against an entity that won't cower in the face of their outrageous abuses, Dolan told the Post. Yes, finally. I never really liked James. I don't know much about James Dolan, but I kind of like to make fun of some of my friends who are Knicks fans about how terrible he is. But now I like him because that's exactly what they do. And I've pinpointed this a long time ago, calling of course, the federal government, they're thugs. It's the biggest gang in the world, arguably. But they use mob tactics, right? That's why they're going to charge you 3.5% taxes on top of the state and federal, and they're not going to pick up the trash, and the cops certainly aren't going to come when you call them, right? I've been in a situation in New York where I was trying to call the cops, and I called 911 to get to the cops, and they told me to call 311. I called 311. They told me to call 911. And nobody's going to help you there. You are on your own, but you aren't allowed to protect yourself. That much is true. And yes, the gangster-like government in New York has run amok, okay? Moving on. While others have been subject to this harassment, many have been forced into submission or silence. Absolutely. Facts. I'm really starting to like this guy. We are taking a stand on behalf of our fans and the many small businesses who have long been subject to the SLA's corruption. Dolan's corporate entity, Madison Square Garden Entertainment Group, charged in the fiery 47-page filing the SLA's improper actions are an assault on not only MSG, but also all of its fans who will be deprived of the full MSG experience if the SLA gets its way and strips MSG of its rights to serve alcohol. Now, look, I'm not an economist. I don't know exactly how it works, but they need that to bring in money that they're going to, pay taxes to the state to. So I don't know why they want to stop this. Garden goers said they'd think twice about headed to a dry MSG. I would 100% less likely to go, Mike Tabbs, 27, a finance professional who lives in Manhattan. If they take away their liquor license, they would be targeting regular people. Why would they do that? So in response to Madison Square Garden banning a few lawyers, the city is taking away their liquor license. It doesn't balance out. Yeah, this makes no sense, but you are dealing with a completely corrupt political establishment in New York, and they are going to steamroll anybody. Now, they're going to have a little bit harder time because Dolan's a millionaire, billionaire, whatever it is, but imagine just being a regular person, a regular business owner. They don't want you to succeed, so they will steamroll you. And your kids are not going to even let them go to school or go to Applebee's. The SLA has been probing whether Dolan's ban and his use of facial recognition tech to enforce it violates state rules. Word of the attorney ban first surfaced last year, but the controversy exploded in January when a lawyer escorting her daughter's girl troupe to a show at Radio City Music Hall was refused entry. The feud over booze at the Garden has been brewing ever since. See what they did there? The combative billionaire threatened to nix booze for a Rangers game at the Garden during a January interview on Good Day New York. Dolan even held up an image of SLA boss Sharif Kabir and warned he would send thirsty fans his way to complain. So Dolan himself is obviously no saint here. He's been using facial recognition to deny people entry, and I can't say that surprised me. It definitely wouldn't surprise me. I mean, the state would do that too, right? They would do that in a heartbeat. So, I mean, they're both pretty corrupt individuals here, but unfortunately, as bad as it sounds, I gotta side with Dolan on this one, right? I mean, as despicable as he is, we're talking about the New York government who ruined millions of lives, and Dolan, I don't think, has been quite that bad. Kabir should stick to knitting and to what he's supposed to be doing and stop grandstanding and trying to get press, Dolan said. Wow, this is a real beef. Kabir, SLA lawyer Michael Amarato, and investigator Charles Starvel, who subjected Dolan to a tough interview about the MSG policy last month, were named in the court papers. The filing additionally accused Starvel, a former NYPD officer, of launching harassment campaigns against MSG. So these are just bigwigs throwing around their weight at the cost of regular New Yorkers, or maybe not regular New Yorkers, but, you know, I guess fairly wealthy people if they're paying an arm and a leg to get a beer at MSG anyways, right? I don't think most of the hood, I don't think all the Flatbush is going to a lot of Knicks games. That's just me. I could be completely off base there. Starvel spent nearly half of the time asking questions that had no conceivable relation to the purported purpose of the SLA's investigation, the filing said. Instead, he asked questions based on speculative media reports or shared his own opinions about the venue policy. He was combative and antagonistic. The legal papers additionally noted that during his years as a cop, questions were raised about crime statistics reported in the precinct where he had been the commanding officer, of course. So this is what they always do, is they bring up stuff that they just rake you over the coals with other things, which I guess, you know, can kind of drag your character. And when you're dealing with people like this, that's exactly what they want to do. The Garden's policy of targeting attorneys means MSG properties are no longer open to the public, the SLA argued, in levying the charges, I should say. Noting the adverse attorney policy bars members of the public not for reasons to do with responsibility under the license, but because such persons have pending lawsuits against the venues. And yeah, that's despicable, but it does make a little bit more sense than pulling his liquor license, which is going to, I mean, that's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. Because I can assume that the state and the city are going to benefit from the more booze they sell at MSG, and they're pretending they're not. Like, those things are completely disconnected. And I think they are related in more ways than one, perhaps. The liquor license requires the venues to be open to the public at large. The Garden slammed that conclusion as irrational and the SLA's move as selective enforcement. Yeah, well, that's what you're dealing with. Selective enforcement. Tell me all about it, right? I literally lived through that, but that's another story and I digress. You can find me in the May 2020 edition of the New York Post. And then, look, none of this is all quotes from these people arguing back and forth. These bigwigs arguing about lawyers and booze. And this is just New York shenanigans. A little bit of, I guess, you know, pop culture beef, MSG beef. But I have to side with Dolan on this for the sole reason that he can see and is calling out the gangster-like governing style of the political establishment in New York State. So Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, and of course, subscribe.